record.
Oh, is it? Stop it there. It said record. I mean, it would help if I knew how to rewind this thing to at least see that
Might
it
be
did, but.
recording right now.
Yeah.
Is that rolling yet or not? Yeah? All right, well, thank you everybody for being here tonight. Let's please stand, we'll open with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
So yes, you have packets in front of you. Those, like I said, are everything that was also available on the OneDrive that was shared with you guys. Was everyone able to access that OneDrive? No. Okay, we can discuss afterwards so I can figure out how to get you more access.
And I think.
There was an app to see, download the app or something like that, I tried that.
Did you do it on your computer or on?
I did it on my phone.
There we go. I can show you how to set it up on your phone as well.
I'd rather do it on the computer.
Computer, it's super easy as well. You don't have to do any of the app or anything. Yeah, so everything is in the packets that you have in front of you, except for the sample surveys. Hopefully you guys are able to see those. I'm currently fighting the projector, so we may just pull it up on the laptop to review some surveys. Yeah. So first thing is going to be our agenda. Obviously, Rick is not here. He said that he was not going to be here. And then we're also missing, no, you're Gary.
Why don't we actually
Missing
just
George.
go around real
George.
quick again with
George,
names,
right?
That's it, yep.
so that I can write it
He's-
down.
Okay, Jerry Norris.
Jerry.
Jennifer.
Yeah.
Patrice.
Patrice.
Stephen.
Okay.
Karen. Jody.
Okay.
Sam.
Sam and Bobby.
Do
Okay.
you want this?
No, I'm good with this. Thank you. So item one on the agenda?
So, item one on the agenda are deliverables. So we have our environmental INA section. So if you go in your packet. Yes. And, I was gonna say we have one extra.
Here, we can pull it around.
So the chapter, it's gonna be chapter X, environmental resources.
And then you should have gotten all the maps that are gonna accompany the environmental resources. You can see there quite a bit, quite a number.
Yeah, so all those maps in the beginning will also go through. And then you were gonna do environment?
Yes. So, as part of any comprehensive planning process, we need to map the environmental resources that are within the village, because they influence the land development patterns and what can be developed. And it also speaks to some of the, issues that you might have to deal with from time to time. So obviously, we all know about the Mudna. We know that at times, especially in severe storm events, which, from the climate change perspective, will become more severe. I don't know if did you all have bad experiences with the recent rains and flooding up here?
Very lucky.
You were lucky, yeah.
Very lucky. The ball fields did flood.
Okay,
Not
yeah.
Mansfield.
You know, we obviously all know that Woodbury over to Cornwall, got really hit hard. I can tell you Monroe, there were parts where I lived that got hit very hard. But that's really kind of a sign of climate change. And so it's important to understand where the floodplains are, and then to talk about what good practices are when we get to the place of how we implement development standards. So first, and again, to remind everybody, these baseline inventory, sometimes they seem dry or it's very informational, but that also is a basis for the environmental review we have to do when we adopt the zoning and adopt the comprehensive plan. So the environmental resources essentially starts with a discussion of geology and bedrock geology. In some communities, let's say like Tuxedo, rock will be a major constraint. Tremendous amount of bedrock, very difficult to get large building pads. So in looking at the village of Washingtonville's general geology, you really don't have anything, sort of a band of rock area that comes through the village, but you're really what they call sedimentary geology. It's the shales and the sandstones, limestones, and they're more porous, they're more friable, you can dig through it. So that's why you see a lot of development that you see, because it's not really, there aren't a lot of impediments to building from a geological perspective. The one thing I will say is that within this band of, and we'll have a map of this added, there is a limestone area, and those areas actually can be very porous. And so when that happens, it's more susceptible to pollutants entering the groundwater system. Or, excess stormwater runoff, if there's pollutants in it, can get into these kind of underground channels that form. It depends on the extent to which you have limestone, and again, it's kind of a band, it's not a significant area of the village. But, for instance, we wouldn't want to put gas stations on top of it. It's just not a good idea. It's a good idea not to put certain uses there. So we looked at geology, we also looked at the soils, and there is a soils map that if you look in the packet, it's a very big map. It's this one. It was at the end of mine. Yep. So, if you look at this, these are the soils that overlay the geology within the village. And in general, your soils, again, for the most part, I wouldn't call them really impediments to building within the village. There are 3 that we typically highlight when we're looking at these, and they have been in alternative patterns. And those are special soils. One is called farmland soils of statewide importance. The other is called prime farmland soils, and then the third is hydric soils. So when you take a look at the map, anything that is a hydric soil, it has a lot of water content in it, and that is an indication of, frankly, if it wasn't developed, you would have likely had wetlands there. And if it isn't developed, you likely have wetlands present. Prime farmland and farmland of statewide importance, those are in New York State, the soils that the New York State has identified as the most important soils that are worthy of preservation for farming. Now, when we get to the point of where we look at development suitability, we'll take a look at these soils and say, all right, if there's a vacant parcel, then what are the soils there? What's the geology there? What makes sense in terms of the underlying area that you're building upon? And frankly, when we get to this map, you'll see that a lot of it is, in fact, I should miss some open space there. But a lot of this area, except for the kind of the 2 big parcels here as you're coming into the village, there's not a lot of developable land. You have a very large system of open space, which is a pretty attractive feature in the village. But when we ultimately look at the soils, when we look at hydric conditions, when we look at wetlands, there's gonna be a very few properties that we're looking at. And those are the focus, and I think the prior committee may have focused particularly on those properties. What you're more likely to have is where you have larger parcels, they can be redeveloped. So the other element, when we look at development suitability and potential development locations, is where is there a parcel that might be single family, but that it's large enough and based on the land uses could be redeveloped. Because in your village, you're gonna hit the next cycle. Except for the obvious big parcel, it's a matter of you know, you're seeing some development applications come in now where they wanna do something different. They wanna knock something down, they wanna put something alternative in, and you kinda have to pick and choose, especially when we get to historic and community resources, what properties just, you wouldn't want that to happen to, and then what properties you could see things evolving to allow different development to occur there. So that's soils. In terms of topography, if you look at the map, that looks like, it's also very colorized, it's this one.
Should have like a green and red gradient on it.
You have a name?
Topography,
Oh, okay.
Topography right here.
I'll
we
note
keep it
that.
original.
So topography, this is showing you your high points and your low points. And, you know, I think oftentimes when we look at the village, we think, oh, you know, because you're on the main roads, you think it's flat. But you do have some actual hills and some topography. In particular, you have in the southwest corner, over here, you actually have a little hill that rises. And again, sort of at the corners of the village, you're getting into higher elevations and topography. Those white lines that you see are called contour lines, and that essentially, those are the elevations of the land in that area. So if you see something that says 370 feet, that means that it's 370 feet above mean sea level. That's the elevation. The darker green areas are the lowest elevations, you know, they're close to the creek, that's kind of where everything drains, it's flat there, probably formerly farmland, et cetera. And then outward from that, you can see some of those contour lines as they go up the hills, they get a little tighter, because as it's, associated with the land, as the contours get tighter, the land is steeper to get up there. So again, when we're looking at what could be developed, we also consider that from a viewshed perspective. You know, someone building on the top of a hill, you know, you might want them to keep more vegetation on the site so that they're not clear cutting it, so that everybody has a clear view toward that property. But a lot of the areas in the village that are at these higher elevations, frankly, are already developed. And I don't know that, frankly, it's a big factor, you know, at this point, given the layout of the village. So beyond topography, we get into, and in general, and from a regulatory perspective, there are some communities that will regulate steep slopes. They'll indicate that you need a special permit if you're on a steep slope area because you're concerned about big changes in grade to accommodate a building. There are some codes that also require that you subtract out steep slopes when you're determining development yield. So, or for a minimum lot area. So say, for example, if you're in a zoning district that allows a minimum 1 acre lot, and you have a 10-acre lot, if half of it is very steep, there are some codes that will say, well, you have to subtract that out before we even figure out what your allowable development yield is. So on a 10-acre lot, even though it's 1 acre zoning, if you had 5 acres of steep slopes and they get subtracted out, you only get 5 lots out of it. So that can be imposed if it's a significant condition in the village. But I'd have to say, of the resources here, it's not a significant concern, steep slopes, given the nature of your topography. We then get into what are your water resources. And again, there's a map. And this one looks like this, it's floodplains. And then there'll be a second called surface and groundwater. And then there'll be a third, which also has water features called wetlands. So if you look at first the floodplain map, and we talk about the floodplains in the village, There are two types of floodplains that are shown here. And the source of this information is a federal emergency management agency. They create maps called flood insurance rate maps. And if you're in the village, there's a good chance you might be within one of the floodplains, you know, probably 1/3 of the properties in the village are. And you likely require insurance for your home if you're located within one of those floodplains. So that's when you have this recurrent flooding occurring. If you want assistance, if your home is damaged from flooding, it requires that you have flood insurance. The ability of the village to have flood insurance, they have to have passed a law that manages floodplain development and that they regulate issuing development permits within floodplains. So to get coverage, my recollection is that the village itself has to have a floodplain section, which it does. And so the primary floodplain in the village is the Movna Creek. And that dark area that you see on the map is all the land that's within the 100-year floodplain. And so, you know, you can see a lot of, you know, Cardinal Drive area, that's where a lot of the houses got bought out. You could see how it wrapped around West Main Street. Obviously, some of the properties there next to the creek were also flooded. Some of them, there were like a series of 3 homes that got bought out and were knocked down. And then the lighter purple that you see is the 500-year floodplain. And that generally isn't regulated. It's not something that there are really restrictions on when you build. It's just useful to see because those are also, when you have a severe event, more likely to have some flooding. And over time, I think with climate change, you're probably gonna see changes in what the areas are that are considered 500 versus 100, just because the frequency of 100-year floods that we're seeing is such that it seems like it's like a 50-year flood or a 25-year flood. But again, looking at what can occur, what should occur, this village was the subject of a study where it was New York State rising, there was a community reconstruction plan, and you know, one of the recommendations was to redo your zoning and specifically to look at the floodplains relative to what you allow in the floodplains. So for example, in general, you shouldn't be allowing high density housing within the 100-year floodplain, because you have to elevate the buildings, but even so, if there are homeowners there or occupants there, they are at risk if there's a flood event. And you know, we recently again had flash flooding, but now you're also putting emergency service providers at risk. So, you know, a lot of your floodplain area is developed, but if we talk about future uses and future development and redevelopment, those aren't really the areas that you want to target for those purposes. You also want to be careful of industrial uses, putting bulk storage, fuel, those types of uses, because again, very susceptible to flooding events. So that's the floodplain map. So surface water and groundwater resources. These show where the streams are within the village. And it also shows where there's groundwater resources present. There's an aquifer. And so you have a very large sand and gravel aquifer associated with Movna Creek. And sand and gravel aquifers are generally very permeable, and they allow for municipalities, for individuals to dig wells in there for pretty high yielding wells and a water supply system. And so, you know, that's one of the considerations, is that it's a great water resource for the village, but it's also an area that you want to be careful again of what you put there, because you don't want to necessarily contaminate the resources upon which you obtain your groundwater. The streams are shown in blue, and you'll see that some of them appear in there's a yellow dash pattern, or there's a red dash pattern. In New York State, streams are regulated according to their water quality. And their water quality is identified as A, B, C, and D. D is the poorest quality streams, that they don't have a high standard in terms of what activities are allowed there or allowed to discharge to them. A streams, which are the highest, are actually a water supply. So if you have an A stream, it's usually an A because it is discharging to a reservoir. And so if you're up in New York City DEP area, the reservoirs are A, and all the streams that are tributary to it are A. So A classification, B classification is also high quality, C classification up to this category called CT. So water quality is also classified with these additional identifiers called T and TS. T are trout streams, trout production, and TS are trout spawning. When you have a T or a TS designator, it means that it's very high quality water because it actually is beneficial for trout production or trout spawning. It's again just an indication of water quality. Anything that's CT or higher is actually regulated by the New York State DEC. So if you were to do anything within 50 feet of the banks of that stream, you would need a water quality, you need a protection of waters permit from the New York State DEC. In the village, the Muna is identified as a C stream. So it actually doesn't qualify, and your D streams don't qualify. Having said that, on a local level, if you wanted to still protect the streams within your community, because they're still resources to you that are beneficial for habitat, for wildlife, and for other purposes, you can, and frankly, they're still contributing to this aquifer that exists. You can have your own local requirements where you say, generally don't want development within 15 feet, 25 feet of a stream unless you come in and get a permit. So that someone can evaluate, well, what are you actually doing there? How much you can be impacting surface waters. So as a general matter, your streams are not really regulated by DEC, but again, depending on what's locally important to you, you could regulate them. I would only say the other interesting thing is that, and you'll see from the land use map, that the streams are kind of obviously going through the areas that are also showing up as open space. So when the subdivisions were subdivided a long time ago, someone was wise enough to put those within either homeowner lands, HOA type lands, or they just put them on lands that are now owned by the village. And so you can't develop there. So the likelihood of something happening, at least for the ones that are within the HOA areas and here, they are somewhat protected, and that's a good thing from a water quality perspective. Then lastly, this map is a wetlands map, and we touched upon them when we talk about the hybrid soils. So there are several what we'll call secondary resources that provide an indication of where there may be wetlands. And where all these things converge, then you're likely to have wetlands. So wetlands are regulated at the federal level and at the state level. And at the state level, right now, any wetland that's 12.4 acres or larger is regulated by the New York State DEC. So you do have DEC wetlands, according to this map, within the village. And in addition to the wetland itself, there's a 100-foot adjacent area that's also regulated. So if an activity is proposed within 100 feet of that DEC wetland, then you're likely to require a permit. At a minimum, you might require a review by New York State DEC. And that's not just for subdivisions or site plans. If someone's proposing to build an addition onto their house, if someone's proposing to clear cut the land on their property, because I can see some of these wetlands are going into the backs of properties. If you're proposing to put a shed up, you just can't fill it you're actually supposed to determine whether a permit's needed. Coming in a couple more years, DEC passed a law, it was kind of embedded in the law. They're dropping the minimum size of wetland that can qualify as a DEC wetland to 7.5. So there's the potential for additional wetlands that we would call Army Corps wetlands to actually be regulated by DEC. The effect will be that right now, they're not regulated. Army Corps federal wetlands don't have a regulated adjacent area, so there will be regulated areas around these smaller wetlands. The other thing specific to DEC is the regulations have always been that it has to be shown on a map. So there are situations, especially in agricultural areas where lands are let go, they're let to go fallow, that they were actually drained and they were originally wetlands. So some of them are not mapped because when DEC did all its wetland mapping, it was farm field still, so they didn't get them picked up. During an application review, you may discover that, in fact, there's a wetland present there, but it's not on a map. And so in theory, it's not regulated, but what happens is if the project goes up to DEC just for their review, they'll say this is eligible, and we still want you out of the 100-foot adjacent area. And if you don't, we're going to stop the process and we're gonna list it. So you almost have to still abide by DEC regulations. That potential may exist here. I think there's a few areas, but really they're like parkland, some of the bigger properties. You have enough hydric soils, you have DEC wetlands that there may be areas that would get regulated when you go through the development process, when you look at these. Any wetland has to be delineated. So New York State DEC, if there's a wetland and there's an application, DEC will come out and they'll certify the boundary. So this is just based on aerial data, very high level, where they think the wetlands are, based on the aerial imagery. They'll actually come out and designate and identify the boundaries of the wetland. And then that 100 feet is from that delineated boundary. So Army Corps wetlands are smaller. And what is regulated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, it has to be associated with a navigable waterway. And so those wetlands that are along streams that would go to the Moodna would be regulated. Little pockets of wetland are not necessarily going to be regulated by the Army Corps. Again, in any municipality at a local level, you can decide still to regulate freshwater wetlands, even if they're isolated, which are the ones that are not regulated by Army Corps, because they still, again, they may be vernal pools, they may provide habitat, you just may want to protect them as part of the fabric of the community in the open space. So that's something, as you go through the process, you'll need to decide whether you want to recommend that there be a local water wetland protection law. But so this gives you an indication again of where wetlands may be. The hydric soils are very broad here. Again, a lot of it's been developed, but I would especially focus on those areas that are showing up as NWI wetlands. Those are called National Wetland Inventory Maps. Those are the ones that are indicative of at least Army Corps wetlands, and then the DEC. Army Corps also have to be delineated. They're not, these are secondary sources based on aerials and, again, the zone is determined when an application comes in front of the planning board, they may say you need to go and have it delineated by a qualified person and then determine where it falls, because then you might need a permit at the federal level for any of those activities that are proposed within it.
And there are places where wetlands will change in size, kind of what Bonnie was saying before. Like, let's say the environment around it kind of was developed and now it's no longer developed. It's not being bothered anymore. There was a wetland here and now it's expanded. That's the point of your delineations. And it can go to the reverse, that all of a sudden an area that was previously designated or highlighted as a wetland is now dried up. It doesn't have the ecosystem to support what they would look for in a wetland ecosystem.
So So DEC and Army Corps do define wetlands differently slightly. And the general rule of thumb is that a freshwater wetland, you look for hydrology. So it has to be wet a certain amount of time of the year. There have to be soils. The soils have to show that they're mottled, that they're mucky, that they are normally saturated. And then you have to have vegetation. So the vegetation you see would be hydrophytic, meaning water-loving vegetation. And when you get the combination of all three, that's a wetland. That's why in agricultural areas, if it's been farmed, you never see the vegetation part of it, because it's being cultivated for corn or something else. When it's left to go fallow, oftentimes the wetland vegetation pops up again, and then it gets picked up. And so one of the areas we're gonna look at is, again, a couple of the very large properties to see whether the potential exists that since they've been left fallow, do they in fact possibly have wetlands present on them that you need to consider when you're thinking about suitability. So that's kind of an overview of your environmental characteristics. That doesn't get into habitat, we're just talking about kind of land and water issues. But again, ultimately, we're not talking about a lot of area that's developable within the village. But you do want to, going forward, even when there is development, think about what you allow in floodplains going forward, especially I would say the floodplains. And even considering some of the uses, if it's aquifer and if you're getting your water supply from wells, public wells, you wanna be careful what uses are going and contributing to that aquifer. Any thoughts or questions? I know it's a lot to digest.
And just, basically what we're talking about here, who's the initial contact for this type of information that you just dispersed? In other words, I come to you as a builder.
Mm-hmm.
Who do I talk to first? It's certainly not this committee, am I correct?
So, I need a little more.
You're saying if you want to
I
build
wanna
something?
build
Yeah, so
a
you go,
building down the street.
so you would go to the building department
Right.
and you'd, so. if-
So what I'm wondering is how and when it gets filtered to this committee.
So, well, this committee is just formed for purposes of putting the comprehensive plan and the zoning
Okay.
together.
Okay,
But from a practical perspective, someone goes in and they seek a building permit from the building department. And frankly, the building department is mostly concerned about the regulations that are applicable to the village. And unless that building inspector is brought up to speed and has maps or other resources in terms of where the wetlands, the floodplains, et cetera, are, they're not necessarily gonna pick up on some of those things. Plus, I think there's a question whether the building inspector can say, hey, I can't let you develop because you need a wetland permit. But if you put it in your regulations, then he can do that. So in some communities, we'll say, we'll put right in there are freshwater wetlands present in the municipality, and prior to issuing a building permit, building inspector shall assess whether or not there are and whether additional permits are required. You can trigger the review through the regulations, in as much as he doesn't issue them. But he may not want to issue a permit if he knows something's happening smack in the middle of a wetland. That is regulated by DEC. So there needs to be a process in place that triggers that review at the local level when a builder comes in, or even a homeowner, Honestly, in the past, it's not uncommon that wetlands were platted. And so people with wet basements, people with, drainage issues, it's just because the whole subdivision was platted in an area where it was a wetland. And you wanna avoid that to the extent you need to. Again, not so much an issue here, but floodplains. When you build in a 100-year floodplain, you're supposed to get a floodplain development permit depending on the scale and size of that development. And a lot of the houses on Cardinal, they were in the floodplain and, after recurring repetitive losses, they finally got purchased. So, because The federal government doesn't wanna keep on paying to have a house fixed up so that it can get, inundated again. So good planning practice is to say, we don't want you building in the floodplain, you're not allowed to, except in a situation where that's the only use of land. If you have literally no other place to put anything on the property, we might allow you, maybe you have 10 acres in the wetland, we'll allow you one house. But you don't have to allow 10 houses. And you can say, you don't allow development in the floodplain. And let them go to a zoning board of appeals, which, get an appeal to do something. With, like I said, in general, you wanna leave a little exception so that they get some use of their property, but it doesn't have to be the maximum use, it should be the minimum use.
I'm sorry, I'm just,
Sure.
I'm understanding something. So, for example, you said some of the houses on Cardinal have been bought up by the
Federal and state
federal-
government.
And then there's nothing that can be built on there.
Yeah, so that's what some of these down in here we'll have to get we're going through the process, these are all drafts. And as we go out in the field and check these things out, there may be some change, but these should all be showing up as green, meaning open space, because when the village, so ultimately the village came into ownership of those properties, and they are not allowed to build on them. They might be able to put a trail in, they could use them passively, but those are all now owned by the village of Washingtonville.
Interesting.
Yeah, just like some of the, properties up along the Luna Creek and, and Main Street, and then there are a couple that were bought out in the subdivision over here because they were inundated and purchased. So you can't put another house on there. And the village owns it, and they have to commit to not allowing development.
That'd be like the Sorrel Park.
Okay,
was
so,
one, that
yeah.
house was flooded and knocked it down, you
okay.
can't build on that.
No, so like you could have like a park or anything where it
That's
can be.
passive.
Okay.
Yeah, that you're not going to put really buildings in.
Okay.
You might be able to put structures. I think the parking lot for the police
Mhm.
may be now located on one of the lots, houses, properties that got knocked down.
Okay,
And again, just having a informal parking area, pavement, they're not concerned about the federal government, FEMA, New York State, it's under the Department of Homeland Security that a lot of this programs come under. They're not so concerned about washing away a parking lot. They're concerned about washing away homes, occupiable buildings, offices, commercial businesses,
And the expense that goes with
and the
that.
expense that goes with it, exactly.
thank you.
Any other thoughts? So I think we can touch upon, what's next on our agenda?
Next, we have discussion of land use and zoning. So in your guys' pile of maps, you should have a land use and zoning districts map. It's the exact same one that's blown up here. And Bonnie has gone into some of it as far as, making sure from a planning perspective, that your guys' land uses make sense for their location. So as well as in the map, there's also a small summary write-up titled Land Use and Zoning. There'll be additional portion of this full chapter as it's developed. But like Bonnie mentioned, we're also kind of checking a lot of these parcels with the data that was presented to us. But what you guys can see is that a lot of it, like Bonnie mentioned, is open space, right? So you have all of these sections of light green,
The park.
yeah, are gonna be
That's
your
town
open
park.
space, your parks. And it honestly takes up a fairly decent portion of your guys' area. And then another thing that's taking up a decent portion of your guys' areas are the one family, right? So your one family dwellings. And also, as Bonnie said, a lot of it is already developed, right? You guys don't see a lot of vacant up there besides like our couple big parcels. And even these ones, you guys can imagine, are light green and they're not even vacant. We also have a wide variety right in this little section right here, like your guys downtown, right? That's where you see your mixture of your commercial, your mixed uses. You have like office. So there's a lot going on in your downtown, which is characteristic of a downtown. It makes sense that we see all of the colors in that area. What we also noticed while we were going through some of the data is that some parcels are also grouped with roads, just by common ownership, which was kind of a weird thing for us. So
Yes,
you
so there's
guys,
some portions of the roads, like Ahern Boulevard,
over here,
is showing up still in the ownership of, Wood something Core.
yeah. We have, this one is
Like,
under
I would have thought that was
ownership.
a village road, but when you click on it in the tax records, it's showing up as, and they're the HOA, the homeowners association, that corporation that I guess originally developed this area over here. And for whatever reason, part of that property is showing up as an individual tax parcel in corporate ownership.
Yeah,
So we're gonna, follow up with
there.
that.
There's
Yeah.
still an HOA there.
Yeah,
Are we talking about Woodfield or the
Yeah.
High Grove?
it was,
The
it was,
Woodfield area?
The new buildings.
it was definitely, I think
There's
it's
this
this,
one
What's
here.
that?
it's this segment of in here especially,
There's also, here is technically a parcel, not road,
yeah.
and there was another one.
Well, are they paying taxes?
You gotta put a toll gate up. So normally the way things proceed is someone proposes a subdivision, and they build, and the village doesn't accept the roads until most of the subdivision is complete, because there's wear and tear on the road while they're constructing. And so they finally end up with a base course, then they'll finally put a final course in, and then they offer it to the village, and the village accepts it. Somewhere along the line, it doesn't appear that one of these properties got accepted, at least from the tax parcel
High
perspective.
Grove Phase Two, we're still working on getting accepted. They had some drainage
Okay.
issues they needed to address before we could accept it.
So that's probably why. There you go. Thanks for your input.
Helps to be here.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we'll see these little miscellaneous pieces of what look like road or right-of-way, and they're showing up as vacant. But ultimately, we're probably gonna change the parcels and the acreages, because it's not really a developable property.
Yeah,
It's just this oddity, like the road, that's showing up as vacant, but in fact, a road.
yeah, so if you guys see in the write-up, there's a chart that kind of gives you a general, percentage breakdown of things. You guys can see how much, in terms of acreage versus in terms of the number of actual parcels you have for agriculture, apartments, commercial, your single family, your multifamily, your 2, 3, all of that. But like Bonnie said, we're gonna see some fluctuation in that as we really take a deeper dive into the data and realize that, wait a minute, this is the side of a road, it's not a vacant parcel that you can develop. Wait a minute, this is actually open space, and that kind of thing. Another interesting thing that we found was this section right here, which are condos, I believe.
Yes.
Condos, yeah. The brown, they were coded as single family, and their parcels are also specifically over the buildings, which is just weird. It's just weird. So if you notice, like on all these other ones, it's a square, a rectangle, a shape of an entire lot, which is what you probably live in, just a regular lot. But for these ones over here, you can kind of see there's an outline of the actual building, and that's the parcel that they have identified, and they also have them identified as single family. We have obviously identified them for you guys, not as single family, because we
They're
know that they are multifamily.
So
There's
the
multiple
reason we
units.
call them multifamily is that we talk about uses. And those buildings have multiple occupants within them. And so from a structural, from a building perspective, they're multifamily. They are condos, and they're
Yeah.
individually owned, as if it was an individual house, because they are. But they're still apartment type
Yeah.
living, that's why they're called multifamily. In the zoning, you have, you allow single family, and that usually, and almost always means a single family home on an individual lot.
Mhm.
So those are your yellows. A 2-family, 2 dwellings on an individual lot, meaning, your typical 2-family, either up or down or side by side. 3-family, would be 3 on an individual lot, and then beyond that, they become what they say multiple family. They could be condos, they could be apartments. So land use doesn't deal with ownership, it deals with the use of the land. So whether they're condos or rentals, they're considered multifamily dwellings. The one area that gets complicated, and back to Sam's point, the reason there are multiple properties showing there is they have like the base property, which is probably the HOA, right? But then, because there may be 8 owners in a building, each one of them is assigned another tax parcel, even though it's not a real tax parcel. So it just creates a headache data-wise, but that's why overall we called this a multiple dwelling complex. The other thing is, within this complex, you may have parks or a little open space, for the benefit of pools, for the, things like that, for the benefit of those who live in the condominium development. But they're also attached to parks, or to parking lots and to parking areas. And so we can't really separate out when we show land use, what is the kind of the green area versus what's the parking lot area, let's say.
I have a question, I'm sorry. So I'm looking at like this, single, like the yellow, the single families, and I'm seeing like just, like off of Hampshire, there's like an orange block, and like off of Cornwall, I'm seeing an orange block. So are these
Those are
homes
those
that
are-
have like maybe put on like an apartment on them legally, like, or?
So they're showing up, so
Okay.
this data
Mhm.
comes from your tax records.
Okay.
So real property, you can go to Orange County GIS, you can go to Real Property Services, but when I click on that, Image Aid Online, when I click on that parcel, there's a code that comes up. And so all real estate in New York State is classified in accordance with this property classification code. It comes up as something called 220, that's for a 2-family.
So then,
So,
for
it-
someone to have, built like a 2-family in an area that's a single-family residential, would they have to have gotten some type of variance? Is that, or is that how would it work?
Maybe.
Okay, all right.
So a couple thoughts. One
Okay,
is,
just curious.
the zoning changes over time.
Mhm.
So it could have been legal, at the time that it was built, and then they changed the zoning. That could be an accessory apartment, which is legal. But for tax purposes, and we'd have to talk to the tax assessor in Blooming Grove,
Mhm.
it could be that for purposes of taxation, they're calling it 2. Even though there might be an accessory apartment there. Accessory meaning, usually accessory apartments are regulated where it's,
It can only be a certain amount of the house.
right,
Like you can, in comparison to the overall dwelling size, it can only be a certain size. They still have to have all the requirements of a dwelling though, a kitchen and bathroom. but-
so it's truly, and it's not the
Not
principal.
And that's the point of the whole percentage.
Accessory.
Yeah,
So
and
like a
percentage.
mother-daughter?
Yes.
Yes, or
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, what you would.
it can't be, you can't walk into the accessory apartment and it's half the size of the house. 'Cause
Well,
you're
so-
like, well, this isn't accessory anymore.
So what was happening in my beloved town of Monroe is there was an accessory apartment law. And it used to be used in a regular way, mother-daughters, small little apartment units. And as development pressures occurred, the way that the accessory apartment definition was put
Skewed.
forth was, it said accessory apartment had to be smaller than the single-family dwelling. That's all it said. So you could build a
Mhm.
3,000 square foot house
Addition.
and build a 2,999 square foot accessory apartment. And it said you only have to have you're only allowed to have 1 or 2 bedrooms, because usually you also regulate and restrict the number of bedrooms. Because you don't want the full-blown 2-family. It's supposed to be like a little income producer, let's say it's a senior family, they want a little money because they're retired. Sometimes seniors will live in an accessory apartment and they'll rent out the rest of the house, or it's a mother-daughter situation. So, needless to say, we had to change that law, because what was happening, and it also said you had to build it after the house existed. And yet, somehow, permits were being issued to allow the construction of a building that was essentially two massive single-family homes. And in one situation, one became a condo. So there's no, it was condoized, so they were owned separately, so there's no way that it was now a single family. So, you know, we always have to ultimately look at what's the trend, what's the pressure, what does the village or the community want, what are the loopholes, and make sure that you're regulating it in a way that's acceptable to you. You as a community may say, you know what, it's okay to have two families, but let's call them two families and tax them like two families. No, we prefer to have maybe accessory apartments. You can also have accessory apartments within the building or detached. So some people have converted garages into little accessory apartments or space over a detached garage for an accessory apartment because their kid wants to live, you know, separately from, yes.
I recommend, it works great.
So,
But-
we'll delve into the zoning, especially after we've gotten through all the baseline conditions. When you understand and really have a sense of the zoning and the land use and what your patterns are, then we'd start to talk about what's the vision and what do we want moving forward.
I will say for this one, I'm pretty sure, when we were doing single family, we included single family with apartments, because I do remember, in the lovely, lots of parcels, that some did come up as single family with accessory, so I believe we grouped them in with single family residential. But, so that means your two family residential are gonna be your traditional, like either up and down or side by side.
If I can interject for a second?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be $215 for an accessory apartment, however, our records are imperfect, and sometimes they put it as $220 because the town charges for two garbage units, and we charge in the village for two sewer units when you have an accessory apartment.
Okay, interesting. So, you know, we're not gonna know that.
Yeah, I'm just
So-
going based on data.
And there aren't that many to check. One of the things we've done in some communities to differentiate between single family and then a single family with an apartment is to just put a little hatch pattern on it. So that it still actually shows up as yellow, but with a little hatch, so you know there's an apartment there. But we'd have to see how many there are. I don't know that there are many, and we'd have to check the, you know.
We'd have to go through the
property
assessor records that they have in Blooming Grove. Like I said, a lot of them are misclassified, they should be $215, and they're put as $220s.
Yeah,
And I'll tell you.
we saw that.
You know, and who knows how many actually exist and have never gone through the permitting process. So only people within their own individual neighborhoods know if things have been converted in a way that is not consistent with the zoning. And I will say that if it's an issue, you need to make enforcement easy for them to be able to come to the village, to be able to express that there's a problem. One of our planners is in the village of Ossining. And there they have a lot of situations where people try and convert houses into twos, threes, multi-boarding houses, accessory apartments, all kinds of things. And so they have set up a whole enforcement system where you can actually send an email almost anonymously. And so people, you are gonna get other people who say, my neighbor every morning, you know, they play their music loud when they're leaving for work, you know, something like that. But you'll also get people saying, look, someone's, you know, I found 15 people in this house next to me, and you should be aware of it. So that, because enforcement is so important that you have to keep up on it. Otherwise, you will get inundated with stuff that you don't want. And you need to make that easy for people to be able to communicate with enforcement.
So in all of these, single-family homes, are accessory apartments considered like a legal thing to do if you've gotten a permit for them, or do they require like a variance to have?
So we're going through the zoning right now.
Okay.
And so we're gonna have a full, tonight we were supposed to focus on environmental resources, but we wanted to get ahead to try and keep this process starting
Yeah.
and continuing, so we did the land use, but we're gonna have a full land use and zoning section. So we'll specifically note that you want to look at accessory apartments.
Yeah,
And what the
I'm
regs
just
are.
curious, because I was just looking right now and I'm seeing like a little orange boxes, you know.
That you kind of
every so
surprised.
often, yeah. I mean,
And they could be, accessory apartments, so
Yes, I
we'll,
mean-
we'll take a look. The other thing is that, right now, some of the sections take a little longer because, for instance, you have a code. If you go online and you do a search on Village of Washingtonville code, it's supposed to have all the laws of the village there. There are times when it hasn't been codified, so your local laws were passed, but they didn't get to the publisher to put it into the code book. So we're uncertain if there've been some laws, especially regarding the zoning that regulates land use, that they've gotten in, so we need to take a look at those too, to be able to do a full evaluation.
And also just keep in mind for like your different zoning districts and stuff, you have your permitted uses, but then you're also going to have like your special permit uses, your conditional, if you guys have conditional, and then your actions that aren't allowed at all, right? So even though there's just like some random oranges that are sprinkled in there, they could have just been a special permit or a conditional use. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not allowed or they're like,
they would have
It's
to
not
have
yet.
like
They
a variance.
They would
or
have to
something.
go.
to the
Yeah,
planning
they would have
they have to go to the
okay.
planning board and it's
Possibly
given
the
like
village
special
board.
review, and then also like, for example, some of the communities that we work with, for special permits, it says, okay, you can do a two-family, but to do a two-family, you also have to meet this.
Or have a
this,
larger
this.
lot.
Or the lot has to be larger, or you have to make sure that you're providing, less coverage, whatever it may be. But it's basically to allow for these other uses, but to understand that in order for you to have it, you have to meet additional requirements. It's
So-
not gonna be as easy.
So one of the things we also look at is we overlay the zoning on top.
Okay.
Because you have to be able to see, all right, if there is vacant land, what's allowed to be developed? And so, you know, obviously, these are the two biggies. This is showing up as agriculture still. I don't know that it's actually farmed or not.
No, it's not.
It is farmed? Okay.
They cut
All of
hay.
it?
Yeah, about 100 acres of it,
Okay, is that your property?
yes.
Okay, so that's showing up as field and
It is,
agriculture.
it's the hay fields.
And then is the one next to it yours also? Cause that's showing up as
Yeah.
vacant on the tax records.
That's mine.
Okay.
Part of it is used for agriculture, part of it has a solar farm on it.
Okay, so these are the two biggies, you know, obviously. You know, what you see in blue are the schools. And the schools have a tremendous amount of acreage in the village. You know, between the high school, but then you also have like the bus garage, you have the fields, and then you have the elementary school, right? So those are kind of obvious biggies, within the village. There's some scattered little, you know, vacant properties. This one right now is the subject of a development application. This one is coming up as vacant. This back here is coming up as vacant, but, and these are in private ownership.
The
But,
little corner one is vacant,
Which one?
the one in the
This little
center.
guy?
Yep,
Yeah.
it's like right across the street.
so these
The
two,
firehouse.
in as much as they might be private and vacant, they're, if I recall correctly, like in the Moodna, or the Moodna crosses through them. So, once we develop and consider what's potentially developable, then we put in the environmental conditions and we'll say, well, this problem I don't have to worry about so much. You know, it can't really be, you know, constructed or developed to a major, to a major extent. Yeah, so you know, in as much as you have a lot of single family, you also have multifamily. You know, you also have apartments, but your multifamily is owner for the most part with the condominiums. But there's some scattered apartment, little buildings. You have some mixed use downtown that has some apartments as well. So it's a pretty big mix, but again, what we're gonna be concerned about is something that's showing up that's not government owned, a community resource, even if it's a religious parcel, let's say. If it's a big enough parcel, you don't know in the long term what's gonna happen. They may wanna sell off a piece of the property, they may just not have a big enough congregation, and so they wanna leave. And so again, we have to consider what is appropriate there. So again, all stuff that we do as we go forward. So that's land use, anything that, you have the maps, we'd like you to look at them. If you see obvious errors, let us know. Again, we do what we can based on, I have some knowledge of Washingtonville, so I made changes where I could.
I'm just looking at data, so I'm trying my best.
Right, looking at data, we'll do
And Google Earth.
yeah, we'll do some field research, but you know your community best.
I'm sorry, so I just want to clarify, so if it's single family?
Yes.
It is permitted to have an accessory apartment on it, or it's not, like, ours.
We're
are
gonna,
allowed
we'll,
to have-
we'll have to check the zoning.
Oh, okay, I was just,
Yeah.
all right.
No, that's something
But
we
we
have.
classified it with the single families. for the
Yes.
time being.
Okay.
Yes, so on here, some of these yellows can be apartment. We can go in and add the hatch to differentiate them, which is fine. But we would have to check your guys' code to see, is it permitted? Is it allowed as a special use permit? Is it allowed as conditional? And also, just because it's, like, maybe it's permitted in R 100, but it's not permitted in R 85 or something like that. So it would really fluctuate also depending on your zoning districts. Just like how you're not gonna see, like, an industrial warehouse is not gonna pop up in R 100. You're not gonna see it
Or-
because it's not permitted.
Or, if it
Or-
is, then it's been around for a while,
It's
or it
grandfathered.
was not rezoned properly. Because as, you know, geographic information systems, as mapping tools have become better, it used to be that zoning maps were created and oftentimes they didn't have lot lines on them. And they didn't have this level of detail. So it could be, and that's why we also do, again, the zoning and compare it to the land use, we wanna see if things are inconsistent. Like, is there an industrial building showing up in a residential zone? And if you like that industrial use and you wanna keep it, it should be zoned properly. So that you're not creating impediments to, you know, evolve, to grow, to, you know, add expansions, et cetera. So we need to make sure that things are falling within the appropriate zoning district.
Well, like, I'm sorry, I'm looking at, it looks like the ballpark down off of, like behind South Street. It's that green area,
This one?
park, open space.
Are you talking about this one?
Yes, that one with your fingers on.
Like
And
behind
it's
the
zoned,
banks and all
and
that?
it's- Yeah, and it's saying that it's zoned for single families.
So it is, and I would be less concerned if it's owned by the village
I
than
think
if
that's Blooming Grove owns that, right?
the town owns it.
The town, yeah.
So there's one of two ways to handle it. In to some extent, it doesn't matter because it's owned by the village or owned by the town, and it's a parkland. And they're not supposed to use it for any other purpose. Having said that, could be sold. You know, if a community wants to surplus land, they could sell it, and then it would be subject to whatever the underlying zoning is. You can create a zone that's just open space and parks, and encompass all those areas so that you're assured that the only use that's allowed there is those uses, so that if someone decides to sell it off, then they have to go through a process where they rezone it. And then
Can you
just-
mark that down if we're interested in that? Please.
It's also, but I mean, if that's
No,
Mays
it's
Field,
fine.
it floods quite often, I don't even know how you would
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
put
I really
anything
don't
there.
see that
It just
being-
flooded the other day.
Develop, that's gonna be
Yeah.
one of those, again, that it's like, when you look at it, it's getting flooded, it's getting flooded, it's getting flooded. Why would we build anything that we're ultimately going to have to pay for to fix, cause it's gonna keep flooding? If we wanna put a parking lot in there, sorry to the baseball field, but if we wanna put a parking lot in there, no one cares if the asphalt field is flooding. It's unfortunate, but it's not destroying anything. Any other questions?
Oh, just one quick question too. So all of this white here in Cardinal, that's all things that have been bought,
I'm pretty
purchased
sure,
because it's,
yeah.
they've just.
And they
been
should
destroyed.
show up as green. What happens is when we look at it
Uh-huh.
in the tax records, it's showing up as vacant.
Yeah.
So I go into it and just because I worked on the project, and it shows up as Village of Washingtonville, ownership. they can't develop it, and you might as well call it open space.
Oh.
Because of those limitations from having acquired it through the hazard mitigation program.
So these were flooded and they were bought and knocked down, those houses were knocked down.
Okay, that's why they're.
Yeah, so that was all part of it was a hazard mitigation program. It was after, I always forget, we've had so many, Floyd and Irene, it wasn't Sandy, it was, I think, before that, it was before Sandy. It was
It
Irene
was
and Lee.
Irene in 2011.
Was it Irene and Lee? There was one that was like a 1-2 punch.
Wasn't that Sandy and Irene?
Was it Sandy?
I
I'm
don't
telling you,
know.
we've had
They
so
were two
many.
separate
right?
ones. Sandy flooded New
Which
York.
was,
Sandy was before Irene.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Irene in 11.
okay. So there, that was the one where the flooding was terrible, took out the village hall.
Yeah, it took out
The
half the
library.
mobile home park.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, at the time, the mayor was, I think, Hudson, because he definitely worked with Hudson. And they decided to pursue the hazard mitigation plan program funding. And you have to go out and ask whoever got damage, do they want their house acquired? And there were 18, I think initially there were 20, and then it whittled down to 18 property owners that wanted to get purchases. Then you had to figure out what the fair purchase price was for them. And it was essentially based on market value, assessed values. So the federal government came in and bought the properties, and it went into the ownership of the village. And they had to be, part of the monies were also to tear down the buildings. I think you were allowed to leave foundations in, but you had to pull up tanks. A lot of people in oil tanks, sometimes subsurface. We had one individual who actually, in this neighborhood, wanted to buy out, it was kind of sad. She had an oil tank that it cost her already $10,000 to remediate, and they did that. And there was a lot of pressure being put on her by other people to sell it, and then she just decided, no, this is my house, where else am I gonna go? I want to live here. And so she kept the house. But, yeah, they were clustered here, they were on Main Street. There was the one down here, which is now the parking lot for the police, over here, and then the ones over by Hart. I think we also looked into the one house that's right by the bridge where the candle shop is. You know, so their house is kind of set back, but they decided not to pursue it. That was the other one, if I recall. So, and again, after all that process, you had the New York Rising program that promised monies toward accomplishing certain objectives, including doing zoning, doing upgrading standards to, again, avoid situations such as all the development being, repetitive losses because we're in the floodplain. So, with that, in terms of outreach, it looks like we have signed several.
This was
Individuals.
based off of my notes from the meeting, from last meeting, so if I was wrong on anybody who volunteered to get information, let us know so I can update it. Carol, we had you for the fire department and EMS, and you were able to get that information.
You get an A+.
Perfect. Love it. George isn't here for us to ask him about the school district. Steve, you
Yeah, I
and.
tried the police department a couple of times,
Okay,
and I'm still waiting for the chief to get back to me, so
Okay,
I'm
okay,
kind of in the limbo.
okay.
I don't know whether they're too receptive on it, to be honest with you.
Reach out to me, I can get you in touch with Chief.
But yeah, I mean, I've been in there twice, and,
I'm just, anything you need, you let me know, I'll make sure you get it.
well, that's why I need access to the chief. He has my car.
Access to what?
There's a
The-
set of
the
questions
about,
Okay, so
about community services and facilities.
I will make sure he sits down with you.
okay, he's got my information. so-
Okay.
And I was there just yesterday again. He was too busy.
Like I said, I'll make sure he gets an appointment with you.
Right.
perfect, thank you.
I think wastewater, we may have decided to handle just because of the complexity. I thought someone was I know Rick talked about utilities to a certain extent. But we'll follow up with that.
Yeah.
So, community services, do you wanna tell us a little bit about the outcomes?
Oh, as
And
far as,
we gave everybody, a summary.
I was able to meet with, it's very convenient because right now the chief of the fire department and the chief of the Blooming Grove Ambulance Corps are the same person. So it was very easy to, you know, have one meeting and get this information. You know, and some of you may know this already, but he really gave us a great concise, report on how many vehicles they have, how many, people they have right now. Looking at the fire department, they are still all 100% volunteer. And that is not easy nowadays, I will tell you.
Yeah.
You know, the ranks of the volunteers are diminishing, you know, as we speak.
So it's just the Manel, there's the one fire department building?
Yes,
Okay.
they have purchased another piece of land that is outside the village.
Okay,
It is a little bit beyond Blooming Grove Town Hall,
okay.
on the right side of the road. And they're hoping to build a auxiliary station there.
Okay,
I think they planned on building it much sooner, but then we had pandemics and everything else happened. So they're looking within the next 10 years, hopefully, to build that. They've really, you know, they've outgrown where they are. Some of their vehicles are stored outside, and that's really not optimal,
okay.
you know, for emergency vehicles. You always want them inside if you can.
So would they keep the existing building, or would they try and sell it?
I believe they would keep it. This
Okay.
would just be a second.
This one would be the
Station.
second one,
This-
another one be.
This would be the main one,
Okay.
and the one that they're going to build would be their substation, as they call it.
Okay.
Because they cover, you know,
Do they cover more than the village?
a little bit, yes.
Okay,
They cover the northern part of Blooming Grove, which is north of Round Hill. And then they have a contracted area also with the town of New Windsor. And I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I can find out if you want more information.
if it's north of Round Hill, it's a pretty big area. Is it like north of Round Hill on both the sides of 208?
I don't know exactly, but I can
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah.
You know, the whole town, the way it's made up, the whole town has several different fire departments, and they all mutual aid with one another. But Monell, this one here, is the basic one that covers mostly the village.
Okay, yeah.
But I can find out further if you wanna know
Yeah, I was
exactly.
curious what demands are placed on them from outside the village, you know, because we're thinking more about the village itself.
Right.
But it looks like it's definitely a bigger area.
Mhm.
That was interesting.
And with maybe even, getting some data as far as like how many mutual aid calls are they doing in comparison to like just calls of within, right? That would really give us
Yeah, if they have a
a
broken down.
quantitative understanding of like how much are they getting pulled outside of the village versus just doing calls within.
You know what, that's a little bit hard, because when, for instance, when Monell gets a call, so does Salisbury.
Oh, okay.
They, you know, there's not only one fire department is called for any call.
Well,
So
so is Salisbury in Cornwall, or that's Blooming Grove?
Salisbury is Cornwall, Blooming Grove, and New Windsor.
So,
Salisbury Fire Department services
those three areas, I mean, it makes sense, because it's
Parts
like, right,
of.
yeah.
parts of.
So they're volunteer, who's paying for the equipment? Their village taxpayer money?
Well, yes, there is a line on the taxes.
Is it the
because
fire district still?
it
Are they
is
part of the
fire
fire
district.
district? Okay.
So the fire district, for anybody who doesn't know, is almost like a little, I wanna say, a little mini municipality of their own, if you wanna equate it that way.
Kind of like a school district.
Yeah, kinda like that.
So is it a town-wide fire district?
No, they're
Oh.
individual fire districts,
So there are multiple fire districts in Blooming Grove?
yes,
Interesting.
There's
yes.
11 fire districts in, I believe, in Orange County alone,
Oh, there's more than 11 fire districts.
or is it 18, something like
There's
that?
way more than 11 fire districts.
So,
There's 52 fire companies
right, so I
in
think,
Orange County.
so in Monroe, there's one fire district, but there's multiple companies. So, that's my recollection. So the individual firehouses, they cover certain areas of Monroe, but overall, when you pay your taxes, I think it's one municipal district.
It may be more than one,
It may be more than one.
yeah. Within the last couple of years, they switched a few things around in Monroe, but it may still be more than one district. But so in the town of Blooming Grove, you have Salisbury Mills is a fire district.
Okay,
Washingtonville is a fire district.
South Blooming Grove has
South
fire.
Blooming Grove, fire district.
yeah, that makes sense. I think because you have, I mean, even in Monroe, they have, because I thought the village and the town were combined now. But then you have a little piece of Harriman still,
Right.
you know, as well. So here, you would have at least South Blooming Grove, Washingtonville, then you have the town. But how the fire districts actually lay out, so one of the things we could do in terms of mapping is so your property classifications, the property information we get, taxes, they will also provide districts. So we can see if there are like 4 different numbers. And then we can map the 4 different numbers and it'll show you what the districts are.
Mhm.
So that'll give us a sense of where Washingtonville's district is
Yes.
and how much is being covered by Blooming, you know, outside of the village, within the town of Blooming Grove and New Windsor.
And Brian may have that map already.
They may, and the county may already have it,
Oh, I'm sure.
yeah.
Carol, there are 104 fire departments in Orange County.
Yeah. Well, fire departments,
Yeah, that's not the districts, but that's
Yeah,
how many
that's not districts.
departments.
yeah. Because districts are usually less than the fire departments, because some of
Yes,
them
there
are
are several,
consolidated
yes.
fire districts.
Like even Salisbury Fire Department is Salisbury Mills and Mountain Lodge.
Yeah,
Those are the 2 fire companies that are in the fire district.
in the district, right, got it. So we'll take a look at that.
It's
So,
complicated.
in terms of their needs, they said they've outgrown the current firehouse.
But I don't think they would be looking to expand within the village because that substation would allow them access from a different location, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Easier access from a different area.
Rather than getting rid of and moving, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer almost.
And then they
Getting
can,
through our village,
Right.
I'm sorry?
Getting through the village to get to that side
Is
is difficult.
difficult, and it has been for a long time and only gets worse.
Right.
so in this way, you got the one on the one side of 208, the other on the other side, and so you don't have to worry about crossing the line in terms of access.
Yeah, much easier.
So should the population or non-residential development increase, so would our call volume. Volunteer membership has been slowly decreasing for many years, and the need for career staff may become necessary within the next 10 years. So a paid,
Right.
and that's not surprising in general. I mean, that's kind of been
I
what's
will tell
happening
you
statewide.
someday, maybe not, within the real foreseeable future, but I imagine that we'll end up having to have a county fire department
Mhm.
with paid people because you just can't, this can't be sustained the way it is.
So one of the things that sometimes the community will do is, oftentimes the fire departments are populated by younger volunteers or older volunteers. Because the older ones are retired and they have more time, and the younger ones are really into it. And so, but the issue is always where they live, because they have to live here to be able to, service the area. I mean, in terms of getting to a call, it's easier if you're nearby. I don't mean literally have to live here, but live nearby. So sometimes if, for instance, you can have as part of your zoning, affordable housing provisions, that if a project is gonna include X amount of dwelling units, that 4 or 5 have to be set aside for the benefit of volunteers. And you kind of put a hierarchy together, that first is for volunteers, then it might be for government officials, that work in the community.
Town of Lloyd.
Hmm?
Town of Lloyd has that.
Yeah. So, and then you go down, and then eventually you have to kind of let it open to anybody like, and they'll do that with seniors, you know, maybe allow the seniors then. Then they may say anybody in the village, because we wanna keep village residents here. And then you'll just say Orange County and then everybody else, because at some point, if you can't find someone to inhabit, let's say a rental, you need to open it up. But at least you prioritize first when something is vacated or when something becomes available to the people who you need.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is great.
so it's something to think about here, but again, there's gonna be limited opportunity as far as where that can occur. Sometimes the community will give a little bit of a density bonus to then be able to set aside the units. So let's say normally the zoning would allow 50 homes, you might allow 55 of them, where 2 of them are set aside for affordable opportunities. Because you're gonna have to offer them at a price point or at a rental that's gonna be lower typically
Sure.
than the market. So they kind of, you try and offset that.
Mhm.
So something to think about as we get into zoning and recommendations. So are there any locations in the village where emergency access could be improved? That's the east-west you were talking about, and north-south. It's that crossroads.
Yeah. You know, when kids are being dropped off at the schools, or when during dismissal is horrendous. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, if you're trying to get through the village, that's also impossible. You know, among other times.
Yeah.
So that crossroad is really, really difficult from an emergency service point of view.
Is a lot of it generated by the school itself, or is it just
Calls.
commuters
Oh.
coming through the intersection?
I would say a fair amount is generated by the school. You know, you've got buses coming through, but then you've got a lot of parents who are dropping off at the schools as well.
With that, so that's probably more the AM peak, the 8 to 9.
Yeah.
But during the day, kids are normally getting out at 3 or so? So
Yeah,
it's not as much of a,
2 something.
okay, so it's not as much an overlap in the PM period, it's the AM period,
Dismissal is a little bit of an issue.
okay?
Usually they stop traffic to let all the buses out of the high school.
Yeah.
So if you get there at the wrong time,
You're there for 10, you're there for 0 or 10.
you'll do whatever you can to go some other way, you know. So that's an issue.
Okay,
And the rush hour times are really an issue. You can be backed up forever.
do they have, it's interesting, when we get into the school districts and we get into community services and facilities, we'll have a school district map. Because obviously the school district is larger than the village. And so I'm just curious how many buses are coming and going and how much of the population is outside the village. But even within the village, I guess, I don't know what their policy is in terms of at what point you expect kids to walk and the busing won't be provided.
I think it's a mile.
Yeah.
Because my daughter was rejected because she's like literally 2 blocks shy of a mile.
Okay, so it's 1 mile radius from the school? So is it 1 mile from the elementary and then 1 mile from the other complex?
It's 1 mile from the middle school, she's in 8th grade,
Okay,
so I don't know about the high school. I'm
I don't
assuming
even
it's
know
the
if
same, they're
they-
not that far apart.
do they make them walk for elementary?
No,
No.
I don't think it's a
No.
good road that the kids would be able to walk on.
Just so it's really the middle
That's
school,
what, town?
middle and high. Okay.
Because there's 3 elementary schools.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but there's only one in the village.
Yeah, so those are again, the 2 complexes, and when we get to the community facilities section, all these properties will be labeled, that are showing up as community facilities of what they are. You know, village hall, fire department, things like that. Anything else in terms of fire that you want to bring to our attention?
I think that's really it,
Okay.
as far as that. If there's more questions, he's very happy to answer any other questions that we have.
Okay. And then in terms of, emergency services?
Well, they've also outgrown their home.
Okay.
They are on North Street, and so that's an issue, just getting an ambulance out of
Isn't that
that.
like a little house or something? Or
Well,
is
it's a
that
little 2-story building.
right by the Stewarts? near there?
Yeah, right by Stewart's. So they have outgrown that. They are, in the process of planning a building which is, by the town garage. It's gonna be by the town garage, I don't even know if that's supposed to be public knowledge, but.
Now it is.
Now I guess it is. The town garage is a little bit past Hudson Road, down 94.
On the south side, right?
Oh, don't tell me north south.
On the, oh, okay, on the creek side, on the creek
Yes.
side.
On the creek side, yes.
Yes.
East side.
Yeah.
So that's, but that's in the planning stages, so that's gonna be a while. They have, in recent years, they have hired more staff than they had before because it's just necessary. There's, I think it's, almost 2,000 calls, in
That's crazy.
2022.
Where are they going? What is their area?
Well, their area, and that's in here as
Is
well.
it bigger than the fire company?
It's, yeah, it is bigger than the fire
I was gonna
company. Cause they, they cover the entire town of Blooming Grove
Okay.
and part of the town of Hamptonburg. So it's quite a big area.
And Hamptonburg?
Yeah, I think it's about 60% of Hamptonburg. It's this side of Hamptonburg before
Okay.
you get to Goshen.
Now, do they do South Blooming Grove or South Blooming Grove has its own?
They do South Blooming Grove,
Okay.
as well.
Okay.
There are some parts of South Blooming Grove that have a private ambulance service at this point in time.
Yeah. But there are some that call
Oh,
down
absolutely.
for it, okay.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, yeah,
Calls.
in less than 10 years, I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, they were, except for the paramedics, they were 100% volunteer. And now, as you can see, they've got 22 career EMTs and 27 career paramedics, which we need. We were the first to ever offer advanced life support on an ambulance service.
So you have Blooming Grove Ambulance has become a model for what other agencies within the Hudson Valley strive to become. How is it a model
Because of how we added our advanced life support.
for your ALS?
Yeah. And the way the core is run.
And how is it run? I'm just curious.
Well, they do have a board of directors,
Okay.
but they do have this chief medic who he's really excellent at what he does. I don't know how he is as a chief for the fire department, but I did have an opportunity to work directly with him
Uh-huh.
as chief of the ambulance corps. And he's
Organized.
really excellent at what he does, yeah.
Great,
And we have great medics.
fantastic.
So you don't have to worry if you get sick in the town of Blooming Grove.
If I can't reach Monroe, I'll call Blooming Grove. If I think I have to pay them.
I've called him once or twice for my son, so,
Okay.
yeah, awesome.
Yeah, good, that's great to hear. But they have the same issues as far as, access, it's the same, it's that crossroads. When they do build the new facility, because it will be on the other side of 208, that will make it much easier because they'll be able to go down Hudson Road if they need to get towards South Blooming Grove. They can even go, they'll be able to go, I guess, I'm trying to think of which.
Do many people go over the other bridge? Like, is it just because like Woodcock, you have to go to Woodcock and you have to come in to eventually get into the village? If you want to avoid the
Yeah.
intersection, I mean, you can go Woodcock,
Oh, yeah.
you know what I mean, this way, but people just, do they do that or they're like?
Oh, sure.
I do it, I've done it a few times.
Okay.
I'm quite sure people do it.
How far does it get backed up? Because, in theory, you can cut through, and I bet you people cut through by the bank parking lots and the rec facility to avoid the light. It's not quick cut through, but just to get around it, I guess, but then there's the creek. So, that's still pretty close to that intersection, so it's not like you really have much of an opportunity to avoid the light.
Yeah. If you're coming out of something going on at the high school, you definitely wanna go right and then go down Hudson Road. That's exactly what you're saying, so that you can eliminate all that.
And people do that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
As far as going through the bank parking lot, sometimes that's not such a great thing because you can't see to get out of the bank parking lot onto
And it
ninety-four
takes time to
anyway.
get around that, you
It
gotta
does,
zag around, hit a
Yeah.
stop sign.
So there's
cut
less
through
of
the bank.
than you would think, I
Yeah,
think.
especially if you wanna head toward Tolman, so you cut through, but then you have to make a left,
And you
and now you're
can't.
making a left on, right, on
Yeah.
94, waiting for the traffic.
And that's when North Street is coming out as well, that's a mess.
Yep.
So that's, you know, for any kind of emergency, anything, that whole area there where the traffic light is and anything contributing to it is a problem.
So it'd be kind of interesting, again, long-term, if there's development that occurs, if there's a way to get a little bit more of a more direct cut-through as a sort of a back door in Washingtonville.
And that's, I think, what Ahern Boulevard was kind of meant to be. You know, now it goes all the way through to the new building, what's those roads? I can't remember what those roads are, Sue. Do you remember the names of those roads?
You told
You
me.
know, Ahern,
There's Ahern,
that now has gone through the
North.
new buildings that are
Bull.
there.
Well, it's Ahern cuts across and it goes over toward, you mean over towards Woodfield?
Yeah, but now it goes all the way through, because there's a new building.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, High Grove.
it goes all the way back out to 94, right?
Yeah, but it
Saying
goes
to
all the way
left.
through.
And then it goes here, and then it hits North and Bull.
It goes
It
more than
doesn't
that.
go out
Right.
to 208 though. It doesn't go all the way out to 208. So it doesn't completely bypass the village.
No,
Right.
it doesn't come out this way.
No, the
It's
only
not oriented
solution to that,
way.
Carol, really would be to take the old rail trail that they're gonna make a walking path
Yeah.
by my house and make that a
The
road
This.
and
Yeah,
a bridge
you
over the
go
moon
behind
there, and that'll go
everything.
right to the high school from 208.
Yeah.
Yeah, but,
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that's the only real solution at this time.
well, the other is to come through here, like that.
May I add something? In
Yes.
1965,
Since I just drove up, I
in
just rode on your
1965, the urban renewal planning that was planned for Washingtonville, and I have a copy of the book, proposed a bypass road, sort of where you're indicating, to eliminate the problem of the traffic at the intersection.
Yeah.
In those days, that was 1965, there was a lot less traffic, and it was a worse intersection, because there was a little traffic circle there,
Oh.
instead of the cross intersection. The two ends of 208 didn't line up. You had to make a right, you had to go
I missed
around the
that.
circle and then go left.
Well, that's
I like that better.
interesting. I have to tell you, that's an interesting concept though, because there are communities that get rid of their intersections
And put circles.
and put the circles in. And I'd be curious
took it out.
if it would be more of a nightmare, because people be like, I don't know what to do here, or if to get rid of the lights would help.
And we had a conversation about this at some meeting, I can't remember what it was.
I think it was with the,
The previous
Yes.
thing, where we actually discussed putting a circle back in, and that there probably is not enough space there. We'd lose some of the corners of where the Christmas tree is and all that fun stuff.
You definitely have to somehow incorporate that property where the Christmas tree is, where the parking is,
Right.
You
I would
know,
imagine.
years ago, that wasn't parking, okay?
Yeah.
Well, years ago, it was different. It was very different, and you could drive through that way. So you weren't going, you didn't have to necessarily go like this, you could go like that and miss the, you know.
We could
Goes
probably
light into
find
it.
old area, oh, I can't talk tonight. This has been like 4 days, I think, of 10 meetings. Old aerials that would show what the configuration was back then.
Because F&J Pizza was not where it is now. It was across the street, it had a beautiful patio outside where you could sit and watch the world go by.
But
That
that
would
would
be
be their concern now, because there's no parking, so it's gonna impact their income and revenue.
Yeah.
That's
Is
true.
it something that you could connect to?
I
or
go
is
to
it
F and J and I'll just park in It's work too.
I was just
Well,
gonna bring up.
considering somebody just got hit there the other day.
We'll see before the end,
On
this goes.
Facebook, it was a hit and run.
Yeah,
It was
so-
parked and it hit a, it's not
was
Facebook.
walking.
Oh, someone did
No,
that.
someone had a parked car. They said it was a red truck.
Just so it's, yeah.
The next one, I'm gonna have the
So we don't need to.
Like, I'll walk by like the library.
You know, several years ago, Mike Cook, who used to own the auto parts store, I don't know if you remember him. He used to own, what's the name of that auto parts store, it's still there.
I don't know, there's still a bump.
Yeah, right next
I
to
think it
Broken
is now,
Ladder,
right?
okay? Mike Cook used to own that, and he actually proposed a traffic circle, and everybody lost their mind at the time.
There's an AutoZone over by, I think it's AutoZone.
Yeah, it's the
By,
library.
Yes, yeah.
by Dunkin'
Yep,
Donuts.
yep.
I'm talking, yeah,
The one
but I'm
before.
talking about the
Yeah.
one next
near
to,
the bar
yeah.
and the Pine Store.
So,
He still owns it, Carol.
I can't.
I'm sorry?
He still owns the building.
Does he still own it?
Yeah, I just spoke to him a couple of weeks ago about a matter, yeah.
Okay.
so getting, just to finish this up, so as locations in the village where access could be improved, again, it's the intersection that becomes problematic. And, were they receptive to additional information, or they definitely have their site by the highway garage?
Yeah, they do.
Because the highway garage is close to the floodplains, if I recall. And
Probably is.
so I would ask this question, when the fire department has its property, is it big that they could have fit the ambulance there too?
I don't know that,
Okay. Yeah,
and
just
it's
curious.
very steep,
The new property?
very steep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the one across from the high school. There's a garage building right across from the high school.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
That's not the one
No,
that
no.
she's talking about. She's talking about one
The one that's the
beyond,
highway beyond like church?
you
Out
know, you
on
go
94?
beyond the bridge there where the pitch and putt is,
Yep.
and you start going up that hill on the left. There's probably 10, 12 acres that the town has, and they have their garage facilities in there. That's where they keep all their
Down
trucks
the
and
hill on the
so on.
left.
Isn't that where
It
like,
has a large plow.
isn't there like,
Yeah.
isn't the church out that way, the big newer church?
Oh, that's
That's
way.
no,
Is
that's
it
much
still
further.
much further?
Way
Okay.
beyond.
There's
Okay,
an
that's farther
animal
than I think.
rescue back there too.
Okay.
on that
Yes.
part.
Okay. Is that the town's animal rescue?
No, I think it's, the
Just
woman just,
does rescue there?
pays rent, yeah, she has a facility.
Okay.
Isn't that Blooming Grove Humane Society?
That's the Humane Society.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
live in
Humane
Oak Park.
Society. Oh, yeah, it's the
right.
town,
Yeah.
it's the town.
That's a large area back there.
Yeah.
But the town bought a parcel that's next to
Two
the,
parcels.
next to the, town garage.
So that's the one they're
That
talking
there was a
about?
house on and stuff, and that's where the ambulance corps is going.
Okay, so out there. I was in a different location, for sure.
But it's not that far out of the village, really.
No, no.
It's
No, it's not.
beyond Hudson.
No. It's heading out toward the town hall.
Well, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Is Hudson where the golf is?
Pitch and putt, yes. That's Hudson Road.
So we're at 8:15, so we want to start to touch upon the surveys. Did people have an opportunity to look at the surveys? We can put them out, yeah? What do you think?
I did not. I have to, I cannot tell a lie. I did
Right
not.
out
That's
of-
okay.
Right out of college, I worked for a marketing research firm, so.
Oh, good. We're gonna expect you to write those.
The one comment that I have is that I think when I first moved here about 5 years ago, they did have a survey that kind of went out. I'm not sure what kind of return it got.
I
But
think
some
we
of the,
discussed that last time, that it was given out by the village
Board?
itself, or the board or something, to get a idea of how people were feeling right before the pandemic.
And no one
right
can
around the
find.
pandemic.
Or at least we can't find the results. No one's been able to get us the results of that one. And because I thought there was
I
one.
think past administration, Valerie, I
Okay,
thought might have them.
Valerie Kripke?
No, what's,
Ladaro.
Ladado.
Ladado. Oh, it's a Valerie,
Yeah.
because I know she's on the Blooming Grove, she's the one Valerie I know, on the planning board. Yeah,
But I know that like some of them are like 20 minutes. It'll take too long because they won't do it.
Okay,
So I think
shorter.
it needs to be short and concise.
Yep.
Um,
yeah, each of those, again, each of the committees came up with questions. Some of the questions were because the comprehensive plan had already been drafted and they wanted specific input on particular objectives. Others were just basic, first tell us about yourself, so we can get a sense of who's taking the survey,
Right.
and then more generalized. So I would also say that definitely the timeframes varied. Then there were some that get into showing images, because sometimes people don't, if you tell them, what do you think about 4 units to the acre versus 8 units to the acre? Well, they may be like, oh, that sounds horrible, you know, any of them. But then when you actually show them a picture of what 4 homes on 4 acres would look like, or what 8, let's say, apartments on an acre would look like, then the reaction is different. Reaction also depends on what it looks like. So sometimes we do this to prepare design guidelines and say, do you like this? And do you think it's appropriate somewhere in the village? And we will go from a scale of single-family home on a large lot to more like village scale housing, where maybe they're on a 1/4 acre, you know. And then we get into the multifamily, and then, you know, even the multifamily can be your typical, you know, 2-story, more of a garden apartment, up to 3 stories, up to 4 stories. And at some point, when you get the surveys back, you'll find that they'll drop off at some point because they just think it's not appropriate. And then you do the same for, you know, like industrial type uses, and you do the same thing for commercial uses. And then for commercial, we've shown your typical, like, more of a strip center, even if they're, you know, what, nicely landscaped, et cetera, we just show something like that. And then you show more of a downtown environment. And you say, well, what are your preferences? And I have to say, most people usually say the downtown environment. So then that's used to say within the comprehensive plan, this is the vision we have for our downtown. It's not shopping centers, it's, you know, not parking in the front, it's a downtown environment, like a Warwick, or like what you have close to the center. And make sure that the zoning regulations are actually written in a way that make it happen. Because it's one thing to say you want the downtown environment, but if you're not requiring that the buildings are required to be up close to the street, you're gonna get the parking lot in the front. So, so sometimes you'll see in those surveys, if you haven't looked at them, you'll see images as a way of 2 purposes. One is design related, but the other is, okay, people might not understand what you mean, but you show them in pictures. In terms of questions, you know, there's really not a prior comprehensive plan to review. Because sometimes we'll say, okay, this is what the prior plan said, do you think it's still valid? Well, that's not happening here because this is really a new plan. So you have to look more into what I think are the issues, and what do you think are the opportunities, and what are your needs right now, if you do it.
Yeah, I think like over the past couple of years, or year and a half since I've been starting to get involved in the government, I think people in general just want Washingtonville to stay as Washingtonville, the way that it is. And with the lack of vacancies, we're kind of limited to what we can put there. I think that's the vision, is to kind of, I mean, 61 North Street, you know, people were fighting that because it's only 2 stories, it's 28 apartments right here by the lake. So, you know, I think it shows that that's not what we want here, so I think that's what we.
Right, and maybe that's
No.
appropriate somewhere, but not there,
Right.
you know, because of all the concerns you have with the traffic, you know, and backing up, because it's maybe up against floodplains and other environmental resources. You know, also you're knocking down a house that everybody just, you know, thinks would remain, and now you're like, wait a minute.
It just doesn't fit, I don't think.
Aesthetically, you're getting the side of the building instead of the front of the building, you're getting a lot of parking. And so, you know, maybe if it was something that was far more attractive and looked more like what was, you still may be unhappy that they're gonna demolish, but you could live with what goes there based on, okay, a reasonable number of units and really the aesthetics and trying to keep, like you say, keep Washingtonville, Washingtonville. So, you know, from your perspective, and we touched upon this a little last time, you know, do you think the survey should happen sooner or wait till you get more information, have more of like a workshop to have people come here and then do a survey? Or should you just start to compile sort of input now so that that could be the basis of what you talk about at a workshop?
It's basically like, do you want to know people's unfiltered reactions before they've seen anything, so that they're not guided per se? They're more guided by what you guys choose to ask about? Or do you want to show them information and then say, okay, what do you think about this information? That's what we're.
I think a combination of both.
I thought we had discussed doing more than one,
Yeah,
right?
well, more than one
Survey.
workshop,
Survey,
and we could do more than one survey.
because I thought the idea was to sort of introduce everyone to the idea of the surveys.
Yeah.
Coming down the line.
Right.
We can actually,
We could do a very,
introduce them to different topics as a gift.
we could do a very simple one to begin
Mhm.
with.
Exactly.
Like, what are your, what of these, I know one of the surveys that we've
Especially
done.
strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, issues, just.
And even that
simple
question
one.
of like your age range, maybe do you have small children or school children in the house type of thing, just one or two questions like that. Yeah, just try to get a sense for who's answering us,
Right, and I think
who's interested.
we also talked about, is there a way to engage actually the youth?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the school system here, because of it being here, becomes a little bit of a, why do people move here? Well, the schools are right in the village, you know? And, you know, do any of those younger people want to participate in some way to say what their needs are? And maybe it's not through the survey, maybe it's through actually reaching out in some way separately, you know, with them. But, yeah, I mean, you wanna capture the most people that you can.
I've heard, I'm sorry, I've heard a lot that there's not a lot to do for the youth within the village, you know? We don't have a movie theater, you know,
We have much for the youth.
really, you know,
Rec
we have
center.
They have nothing to.
a rec
Yeah, rec
center,
center, yeah.
that rec center's been popping up for different locations, like church and,
You know, that's a difficult thing. We did have one. We did have
they're
one.
tough to run,
Huh?
they're tough to run.
And that's the problem. They are tough to run, and that's why they generally don't survive, because they're just very difficult to run.
People have to be committed.
Yeah.
My brother's wife, his mother-in-law, she ran, the hockey program down in Sloatsburg, where they built the rink, they had,
I was involved in that years ago.
do you know Marge Garrison?
Yes, I do.
That's my.
Oh my gosh. That's in Valley Road.
Exactly. So that was like really super popular.
Yeah.
Well attended. But once a couple of key people left, it kind of falls apart unless someone's taken it on. And I think it was much more of a voluntary thing. It wasn't really the village, I think, running it. I think it was members of the village, you know, just
There were
regular
coaches.
residents. And
Yeah.
coaches, and there was whole, you know, the people couldn't afford it, you got, you know, so it was, from what I heard, it sounded like a great program.
Probably like around 2000,
Yeah.
2001,
Yeah.
sitting.
Yeah.
It was probably 10.
Yeah, and so those kind of programs just need a lot of input and a lot of, commitment by people who are able to commit, and I think that's part of the problem. We're
No,
also
and then we had damage done to it by the kids, and it's just, you know, there's a myriad of difficulties along the way.
So basically, other than getting involved with programs that are at the school, there's really nothing else.
CYO,
CYO, the dance
football,
school, soccer.
yeah, so I mean, there
Oh,
was.
okay, so there's some
several-
sports, but there's more sports than,
There's sports.
yeah.
The dancing school is huge at this point in
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Are there Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts?
Yes?
I think I feel like after school gets out, you have a lot of kids, middle school and above, that just kind of wander around the downtown area. And it would be nice to have like a location in town where, I mean, you know, just where they can, you know, exist, yes.
Yeah.
Like,
Do they go to
Stewart's Corner is
pizzeria?
a new place now, so.
I'm sorry.
Do they go to like the pizzerias? Do
Yeah,
they-
I mean,
That whole
I-
general area.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just,
Deli.
yeah, I think that would be nice to have some type of youth center for them. I mean, I have,
That's hard, that's what I mean, that's
yeah,
hard.
I have a 9 and
Yeah.
12-year-old, so I mean, I also have more, like, that to me, you know, that would be a priority, you know.
Maybe it's
also-
something that Blooming Grove and the Village could co-sponsor or.
Or even team with the school district.
Parents like, no.
Yeah, the only thing I think about the town is that one of the,
After-school type, like an after-school program, like PAL, remember that PAL thing?
Yeah.
My kids are playing it right now, they
That's
have
what I
their
mean,
games
like
today,
something
yeah,
like
tonight,
that.
the police athletic
Yeah,
league
you
basketball.
incorporate the
Yeah.
school
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
the plan, the school may be able to participate and offer some kind of, you know, interventions with that also.
Yeah.
Because they deal with the kids directly.
yeah,
So they basically know what the kids
yeah,
would like to do
right,
and may be able to just team up with other entities
Right.
to make that happen.
right.
The other thing I was gonna say as far as the survey,
Survey, I was gonna ask.
I think if you come in blank, you open yourself up for a whole lot of ambiguity, you know, just going nowhere.
Mhm.
Come in with something, it could be very broad, very macro,
Mhm.
get a feel of what people want, and you can get more detail from there based on their responses. Come in with nothing, it's gonna be crazy.
So how do we feel about like Bonnie mentioned, the SWOT analysis, I don't know if you guys know what that is, strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats.
Mhm.
It's open-ended in a sense, but it's guided in the sense where it says, okay, strengths. If, what do you see are strengths in Washingtonville? For example, this could be places, this can be, we like that we have lots of
Programs.
open space, we like that we have these programs, we like, our EMS, we like whatever like that. They can put that under strengths. Weaknesses, what do you think can be improved? So right now, there's lots of traffic on this road, or this house just looks vacant and is ruining the community character. Opportunities are gonna be places where they can possibly improve,
We
right?
actually could have something
Mhm.
similar to that, because we did it with Bob. Bob had a layout prior to all of this, when we were coming together, and there's something there somewhere, I'll look for it.
Okay.
And I know we had something of that, you know, of that nature.
Mhm.
For the prior comp plan committee, or this is something else?
This was the prior committee,
Okay.
before we organized this, there was something more,
Okay,
like, different groups, like 8 different groups, something like
Yeah,
that. That we
okay.
were able to get some information of that same nature.
yeah.
So how would you feel about that for
That was
a
great.
survey?
I think you have to let them, I think you have to, so one of the questions is, do you want them to respond where you say, okay, this is what we think are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and then leave an open-ended at the end? Like, was there something you didn't?
Again, I think there's only, I think the village is, I wanna say limited, there's only so much that we can do. So if we come up with maybe a list and have them prioritize that list, you'll get a general idea of where things would fall. I think a lot of people all think the same way, it's just a matter of what's a priority to them.
Okay.
When you cross-reference that with the demographics, then you'll get an idea of.
So do you think it's too early, I'm just throwing out here, do you think it's too early to say, what if you got rid of the traffic light and put a circle? Do you think they'd be like, is there not enough information for them to react? That's the thing where, do you need to do it more in a workshop where you can
Right.
have more explanation?
Right,
The
because we
logistics
talked
have to
about
be-
it
Yeah.
at
You know,
length,
some-
I mean,
Because-
to make someone answer that.
Because
without
otherwise,
having
a
the
a
background.
survey is gonna be, if you're starting out right away with a survey, simple survey, the questions have to be very simple. You know what I mean?
And to have a workshop, you're kind of getting the people who are interested to
Yeah.
come here, and they probably are gonna be the same people who are going to answer
Well-
the survey, so you're giving them more information before you know what I mean?
So maybe it really does benefit to have a workshop first, because then people come out and they start to talk about what they think of the issues and what they're concerned about, and what changes they fear, and what they say, there's this place and no one ever uses it, and I don't know, you can get more into a dialogue. Then, once you have those reactions and results, you come together, do a survey. You can do another survey later when you actually have a draft plan. And if there's specific things where you felt like, okay, we came up with a recommendation, but we really don't know whether we're on track, and we should probably ask again. One of the things we did, maybe a simple survey, if you just want to generate interest, is for 1, 2, 3, using mapping, and you'll say what are places, we'll call places of distinction. So
Places of interest.
places of interest, so what are really important locations in the village, and tell us why it's important. You know, either it's something to preserve,
I love that. I like that too.
And we can blow it up then on a map like this and say, these are all the points that people have identified.
that if it were to disappear tomorrow, you feel like a piece of Washington's Bill Hart would be gone.
Like the building that Betty's used to be in. No. Just saying,
Yeah.
just
I was
saying.
shocked.
You know what I think is really important here too? To somehow explain to the people at large exactly what we're doing, because they don't understand what the focus and the meaning of this committee is.
And that might, I think you can introduce that a little in the survey, the first survey, again, keeping it simple. The workshop is where you really have to explain, you know. Again, it's really one of those things that you almost need a dialogue.
Because there are things that we can't do.
Yep.
There are things that will
This
never
is
come
true.
to us, you know, like the question you were asking earlier.
Yeah.
There are things that are not within our purview.
We call that, so when we have workshops, we call it parking an issue. You know, you have your bulletin boards, and you write down people's concepts, but someone will bring up something that just really has them tweaked. And they want it dealt with, but it has nothing to do with the comprehensive plan. And you're just like, thank you for letting us know. You know, we'll let the village board know, and we give the village board a list of these issues, but it's really not something the comprehensive plan can address. But when we did this in Schaumburg, all of the town board members were there, and there were like 200 people that showed up. It was actually 200 or 300, I forget, it was pretty well attended. And they were just happy that the town board was there, because then they could go up to the supervisor and say, have this issue, they could go up to one of their board members. They just like the fact that they could say something to someone. And then they also could just participate in the workshop too. So there's so many benefits to just having that face-to-face, you know, to get their input. But, you know, it will be guided, the workshop. We'll have to decide what stations we're going to have and what we're going to ask them. And I think first preliminarily, as we go through these sections, and you said accessory apartments, you know, maybe that's something we can consider. Traffic, clearly, there's a desire to have potentially an alternative route. Well, where would that happen? Where is it realistic, can it? So you might start to come up with asking questions about traffic, or about transportation, or about paths. If the kids are walking around, are they safely getting from point A to B, you know, where they live from?
I feel like the downtown would benefit from, I'm just really curious what this traffic circle would look like, because I feel like it's very hard to, you know, you're walking downtown, you've got like a highway you've got to cross, and it is, certain times, it's like impossible, you're sitting there forever. You know what I mean, I feel like we need like a more walkable down.
No, but it's good for cars, but it's not good for pedestrians.
No, even when they did the Virgintonville, after dark last year, which was great, I felt like, oh, it's too bad this isn't like a bigger area, you know, the downtown area it was fantastic, but like, you know what I mean, I feel like there's not a lot of places, even I was.
Well, traffic circles don't really always work very well.
No,
I've lived in Europe
depends.
in several countries, and it's like playing chicken. If you want to go somewhere, I mean, both trying to get across, walking or driving. I mean, if you're in the middle, you know, by, you know, the Eiffel Tower to, you know, I mean, it's like committing suicide. I mean, it's literally like, you know, it's a nightmare. Italy's the same. You know,
Yeah.
traffic circles can be, because there's no control. It's literally just like everybody's just winging it and
Right,
They're
they're
flying all
supposed to
over
be,
the
but they
place.
don't understand how to
Yeah.
get through it,
Just,
you
Yeah.
know?
Seeing the idea of what would that look like?
Yeah, what
just
would that look
to-
like?
Just to show
What would
people.
people
you don't have the room, you have
That's
to
a
take
good
out
idea, yeah.
part of the library, you
Well,
have, you
yeah,
know,
I think-
there's not enough
I think part of the
room to
Yeah.
really make a reasonable size
I
or
think,
an adequate,
yeah.
you know, circle.
I think part of it would be what's even the feasibility, because yes, I don't know that you'd have to take out buildings, but that middle part with the Christmas tree is likely gone, or you put it in the center of,
Yeah.
you put it in the circle. So that means though, that it's not a gathering place so much, people are not gonna hang out in the circle, but you still have that focal point. They are big into circles up in Dutchess County, on Route 52.
Yeah,
But I will say that they're not in an area that's as tight as your downtown.
And the schools are right there too, I'd be so worried for the kids
Yeah.
coming out and
But-
having to walk that.
But one of the issues is that, so some of the relief is given when you have buildings that front and the parking lots are connected in the back. So if you're traveling, you can catch the street there, or you can go farther down to catch the street. But here you don't have that. You don't have that escape hatch, you know, to go through around the back of buildings. But it might be something to look at in a little more detail. Are there options to do some connections that would help a bit? You know, as little, like I said, as little cut-throughs to kind of avoid, the main intersection, so I think we still have to give more thought to this. We're gonna get through a couple more sections. The goal is to get through housing and transportation and get you the land use and zoning analysis. And then after that, there are gonna be 2 more sections, which would be community facilities and utilities. And then we will have gotten pretty much the baseline. And that's where we really have to focus on workshop and what we wanna be asking the community. And then getting into surveys and eventually transitioning to recommendations. You know, something you always do at the workshop or as part of, a survey is what's the vision? And so visions usually are a few statements, sometimes a 1 sentence, but a few statements about, if I live in Washingtonville 20 years from now, what does it look like? And it may be that the vision that seems to be expressed here is, well, we want it to look like what it looks like now. With some change, you know, maybe a more revitalized downtown. But something that doesn't look drastically different than what it is. So with that, I think we were gonna always allow a little time for anybody who's in the audience, if they had a comment or two before we close up, so. Any comments from the audience that you wanna react to,
I've been
or?
making comments, probably out of order, sorry.
That's okay. I don't know if there's anything that you heard or that you know,
I think there is a master plan that hasn't been followed. I have copies, I think, of a 1968 master plan
yeah,
and a 1993 master plan, but I don't think either of them have ever been
adopted.
adopted or
Okay.
followed very closely.
Okay. Do you want to share those with the committee?
I can bring you a copy, or I can bring them to you, you can copy them here.
Yeah, we could copy it digitally and then just send it to everybody and have it as part of the, you know, anything that is background that you think is useful of what some of the recommendations were and what actually might have happened versus what didn't happen. I think, you know, if you can be a resource for that, that's wonderful. We appreciate it.
And I was on the school board for about 12 years,
Okay,
and at one point, the school was contemplating building another building up behind the high school where the athletic fields are, and part of that was a roadway that would have exited onto Route 208 north of the village, which would have meant that about half the 80 buses that the school have would have been able to go and not go through the intersection. That didn't come to fruition.
I remember when they were thinking about that.
Yeah.
great.
So that's a possibility if you want to eliminate a lot of the school traffic, which creates a
Yeah.
problem at 7:30 in the morning and 3:30 in the afternoon. That would get about half the buses out of the intersection.
the key is to look at what those connections look like, because people are gonna be up in arms if you're connecting to a little neighborhood, to a residential
There's
neighborhood.
homes up there now, but
Yeah.
beyond high school.
Yeah, so
At one
it's,
time it wasn't.
yeah, so I think, you know, sometimes some of these opportunities pass just because the controversy to institute them with now residences, it just makes it very difficult. But there still may be, you know, again,
Depending on the
ideas.
size of the street and.
Yeah, exactly, maybe it's
amount
one
of
way out,
development.
you know, maybe it's not.
That's a large parcel that the school district owns up that way.
They have very large parcels, you know, so there's a lot to do with them. Did you have anything, Pam, you want to bring up, or just listening? Okay, anything else group wants to bring up? No? All right,
If you guys can keep working on your outreach, hopefully.
Yeah, like I say,
yes.
Yeah.
Phil's gonna,
I'll reach
touch
out.
base with him and hopefully he'll.
Also, just as a related thing, we didn't talk about it in depth, but just start pondering if you have anybody who would be a good contact for local historic information. I'll be in contact with them because I'm gonna pester them with lots and lots of questions. But,
Jean Persuado.
yes.
Yeah.
Goal. All right, I will talk to you after this to get some kind of
I
information.
think you would be a great,
Matt Thorns, also from the
yeah.
library.
I'm sorry?
Matt from the library.
Yeah, not from the
He's
library
not
as well.
local, but he's very interested in local, and he's learned a lot, and he wrote the book on the village.
Yes.
And I've been around since 1949, so
Okay.
I can give you some input.
And I would say Rose Workman, but I don't know that she's up to it
I'm
anymore.
not sure Rose is.
Well, cool.
Yeah, that
Thank
gives
you.
us a start. I mean, we look at the usual resources, we're also gonna, as part of historic, look at the community character.
Yeah.
Because we wanna take pictures of the buildings, we wanna take pictures again of identifying what is that character you wanna preserve. So that we incorporate that somehow into the recommendations as well as zoning. You know, what buildings really do you not want knocked down, you want them
Yeah.
reused, things like that.
That was a really important thread, I think, through even the prior committee.
The historical overlay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did see.
We had some.
And there's plenty of examples of zoning that have integrated that, you know, that don't allow the demolitions unless it's absolutely necessary, and really stress reuse. If you wanna use it for something that, other than what it is, then you have to really preserve the building. And so, and keep it preserved, so don't allow the use in and then it falls apart, you know, so. All right, well, thank you
Perfect.
all.
Thank you, guys.
I hope this was instructive.
Nice to see you.
Yes, yes.
And you guys have my email?